Let's have a conversation.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to my next rendition of Let's Have a Conversation. My next guest needs no introduction, but of course, I'm going to give one anyways. We first saw him on MTV's Real World Austin in 2005. He went on to do many seasons of The Challenge. I was looking up how many, and I saw some kind of discrepancy. I heard you say at least 20 of them. I counted about 18 when I looked it up, but I know the stats can be off. He won 3 of them. Most recently, the Challenge All-Stars 3. And he is a complete legend in the game, Mr. Wes Bergmann.
Quite the introduction. On the number of seasons, it might be 18. I count the Champs vs. Stars stuff. They don't. And they do that for kind of BS reasons. But that's not that I guess I shouldn't worry about that too much. And then there's also a season of what do you call it? It was the Spring Break Challenge, which they don't count. And then if you count kind of like the Real World, then all of a sudden we're kind of like at that 20 number.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm not actually counting. I've said 20 for the past like 3 seasons. And in a season or 2, I'm going to say 20. So, cause that just, it's close and I'm not going to actually count. And I don't really like that they don't count the Champs vs. Stars ones because those were harder and longer than any of the Challenge were the first like 10 that they filmed. So
that definitely means that you count your win versus Bananas.
Oh yeah,
the sword fighting challenge.
100%.
100%.
Do you not count it?
I do count it. And I also wanted to say, you're personally my favorite challenger of all time. In my opinion, the best. And I know that in sports, we have these endless debates. Like in basketball, let's say, some people say, is Jordan the best? Or is LeBron the best? Or is Bill Russell the best? And you can make arguments for all of them for different reasons. Like for Jordan, they say greatest peak. For LeBron, they say like longest time of being this good. Or for Bill Russell, it's like most rings. Who do you consider the greatest challenger?
I mean, I would like to say me. And I can make a couple of interesting arguments for that. But like if I was going to just for the sake of making this an easier answer, a lot more cut and dry, and by the way, some of the arguments I'm going to give for why I should win also will air over to the banana side. So it's basically between banana. If I'm not in the arguments between Bananas and CT. CT is a more dominant man in this whole thing. He's like eerily smart with like an engineer's type of brain. And that when it comes to all the puzzles and to kind of thinking through how to win the dailies and kind of to strategize how to get through the finals and everything, there's very few people that can compete with him on that level. Then you get to start. And that's before we get into the fact that he's this big, ruthless, kind of athletic, kind of weird dude. So the fact that like my biggest compliment to him is his brain, and yet people don't even like, let alone his strength. But then where it gets kind of shitty is, 70-ish% of the eliminations are size-based competitions. And so people are scared of him because of his size, and therefore they stay the hell away from him. And and so he plays this like really weird intimidation game that very few other people get to play. And so like the main tip of the hat to him is his intelligence and his strength. And he's just overall just phenomenal at the game. But then on the banana side, like he doesn't get to rely. And this is a little bit of my argument too. Neither of us get to sit back. And we're not small men. We're just like on paper as average size as you could possibly get. And so we don't get to play the intimidation game. And yet everyone, when they come after us, they guaranteed get a frontline story. They guaranteed get extra little clout that comes from it. And from a fear to go in against us standpoint, there's none. Because if they lose to us, no one makes fun of them. And if they win, they rise like in the ladder so far. So it's like guys like Bananas and I have a massive target on our back, just considering like where we're at in the game and our status, with very few like drawbacks to kind of coming against us. And don't get me wrong, like it's statistics say you don't want to go against us in dailies and finals and eliminations and all that kind of stuff. But at least they know if they find themselves in a pole wrestle against us, then it's, you know, 180-pound guy versus CT, who's 215 pounds and much meaner. And so it's just we have a harder path, which makes my navigation in the game and Banana's navigation in the game so much more challenging that you almost have to. That's the argument for giving it to Bananas, which is that, yeah, he's got the rings or whatever, but those rings in some capacity are more impressive considering the fact that he's an average size man.
My edge to you actually was because I felt like you have had the more difficult road, because I feel like as soon as you came in, not just what I feel, I watched it back. And as soon as you came in, everybody was like, we need to get out Wes.
Yeah.
And I didn't even really understand that because at that point you were new.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense because they go after rookies or whatever, and I didn't take that very well. I fought back and I was a douchey.
Was that the fresh meat season?
Yeah, I was a douchey, immature, overly competitive, stereotype when it comes to that. So not only was I was getting thrown in because I was a rookie, which is kind of unfair, but then my mouth kept me there, and so. But yeah, no, like again, here's the argument for why a lot of Bananas' stuff needs to get taken away, and my argument kind of needs to rise. Is there really wasn't any seasons where I've been able to just find some sort of a big tribe and ride amongst that tribe and disperse that tribe. And it's just like when I make friends with the type of people, for whatever reason, it's got a little bit bad luck. They leave, they move on with their lives. And Bananas, for whatever, he makes friends with lifers, and maybe I need to start changing who I befriend inside of these things. But there's just quite a few of his seasons where he's inside of this group that is relatively unscathed throughout the entire time, whereas
yes,
I'm kind of like, unfortunately, a very lone in me navigating. And so it's a more tumultuous road than either of those two guys has.
I wanted to ask you about fresh meat. It looked like at the beginning of that season, they had like a draft combine where they had statistics of the new players. And I want to know how you ended up selecting Casey as your partner for that season.
It wasn't like, okay, so if I remember correctly, it was really just between her and Diem. And I think that part of that was I don't think that Casey got absolutely mutilated on every single one of the things. I think there was just a lot of bad women to choose from. And I got far picked, so I didn't have very many left. And in hindsight, obviously it's silly not to choose Diem, but in hindsight, Diem packed so much luggage that even if I chose Diem, who's obviously a better competitor, if I chose Diem, I would have lost on day one because she packed so much. I never would have beat Danny. I would have been on the first challenge and then possibly never invited back on another challenge after that. And so also, if I remember correctly, they had the stats on these little like placard cards that were up on this stage, and they were not very large. So you have a very small amount of time to look at this very small font stuff. And so what it boils down to is really you're just sizing up the girl. Like, how big is she? Does she look fit? All that kind of stuff. And when I was stacking her, I basically, for whatever reason, I don't remember why, but it was between her and Diem. And, story-wise, I ended up choosing correctly because that it's almost like that season bought me a casting ticket for the rest of my life. Like, yes, I've breathed life back into my invitation, but it's almost like that thing that was like, a long, long time ago, like that's still ingrained in the fandom and the casting team and MTV. And it was one hell of a weird way to start your first season.
What was it like for you in that season, having to go against and take out all of your castmates that were there on that season, back to back to back?
It was very kind of mentally challenging, but like I was so full of piss and vinegar that it's kind of like I didn't do anything politically to get them like thrown in or anything. So it's like, okay, it's like me or you, I guess. I mean, and that's happened in sports my entire life. Like you go into a soccer tournament or you're going to a swim or a track meet. Those are the three sports that I played. You line up against your friends every day, whether it's in practice or in a meet or a big meet or the end of a tournament, even if they're on a different team, you line up against your friends and you shake their hand before and after, and you try and crush them. And and then when you're done with that, you go back to being their friend. And it was and is still just a game that definitely does have life consequences. But yeah, no, that's how I viewed it. It's like a sport, and you play your friends in sports all the time, but you don't go light on them.
I found it interesting for this particular season with the exile situation, where it was just you guys seeing the exile and you didn't have the rest of the cast able to see it. So it felt like there was this legend that was building up of you and Casey, like, hey, they just keep coming back, but nobody really knew exactly how.
Yeah, it was funny. Really funny. And we had them completely confused for a little bit. So we told them, I tried to put the credit on Casey, and we were telling them that it was one eating competition after another. And for whatever reason, it's like, yeah, Casey might suck in front of you guys at everything except for she's just this ridiculous eater. Like I'm barely able to like kind of do my part, and she does everything and then some. And then the problem is back in the day, we would have those T-Mobile sidekicks. So somebody called, they're so much more strict about this kind of stuff nowadays and have been for a while, but someone called Ryan who was Melinda's partner, so who we sent home second. And he told them what the elimination was. And so, but either way, it didn't change much. It's like we're still going in and beating these people. It almost doesn't matter what. But I liked the idea of people thinking that I don't know. It was definitely some mental warfare, but they found out fairly quickly. But either way, they're still lining up to go against us. And eventually, they stopped coming after me. And to this day, and again, this is a very douchey guess as to what happened, because I don't really actually know why they stopped. Why not just keep sending us in? I think that some of those egos eventually said, holy crap, we've given this guy the entire show, and the only way to kind of take that show back is to just leave him alone. And they were right. I got very little airtime in the last few episodes because they finally like left me alone. But by then it was too late. They created a legend.
You know, that's really interesting. And I was thinking of something you kind of were saying at the end of that season, where you were like, it's not about the game, it's about politics. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, if you had gotten in the game and had an easier road where they weren't coming after you from the beginning, do you think that that would have changed the way that you played the game going forward in the future seasons?
Yeah, maybe. But probably not. I don't know, but probably a little bit. I mean, it definitely created a bit of a chip on my shoulder. Towards the end of that, I got this attitude of I don't owe anyone anything. I had a harder rookie experience than anyone ever has, and that includes present day, and no one's even close. Like anytime someone complains, you just sit them down and you try and explain to them it isn't any worse than what I went through. And by the way, what I went through is what paved the way for it's the foundation of my career's pyramid here. And so you don't want an easy road. Like there are so many examples of, for some reason, like a rookie kind of slides somehow. Maybe they get paired with someone really good or whatever, and we never see them again. They didn't get to leave their mark in any capacity. And so you almost want if you care about the long term on the challenge, which I think a lot of people nowadays do, you want a harder path because the easy path has a tendency to get you not invited back, and you want that invite.
I feel like that's a difference between you and Bananas. I think that he was fine with the easy path if he could have it. I mean, obviously it changed once he started to get more wins, but I feel like he rode the wave of his alliances as long as he could.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he was susceptible to not be getting cast for the first like 5 years, right? He wasn't a big character. He wasn't dominating dailies or eliminations or politics. He was kind of skating by, doing a little bit of a lazy game. And there were even seasons where he wasn't invited, which is now kind of unheard of. Like, how can you not have Bananas there? But from my first season to where we're at now, I've never not been invited. It's every single rendition, it's every single season, it's every single spinoff. I guess I wasn't invited to All Stars 1, and now I don't, maybe not even 2. I don't remember if I turned down All Stars 2 or not. But other than those 1 or 2 examples, I've been invited to absolutely everything. And so he was like on thin ice for like 5 years, and then he kind of got that island win where he wasn't sitting back. He was aggressively playing, and he still has to apologize to this day for some of his actions during that season. I'm not defending those actions or his words, but he played very aggressively, and it marked the foundation to where he became like a default cast, from that kind of season on. And then he kind of carried it on. Right after that was the Ruins, where he played a big part in that season, and eventually he had enough wins to where he was just a default part of the story, regardless of what season was going on. So he was always on the whiteboard in a casting, conference room. He's always on the whiteboard.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. As you mentioned, the Island and the Ruins, those were like serious seasons to the West storyline, especially the Ruins. The Island season with Kenny and Johanna, and then we get into the Ruin season, and at the beginning, it's actually titled West Side Story. A West Side Story was the title. Yeah. And it basically showed you saying that you relish the opportunity to be on kind of a messy season with Kellyanne, Johanna, Kohutta, and Kenny. So what were you mentally thinking going into that season?
I didn't know how bad that was gonna be. I welcomed the challenge, but I didn't know how personal everyone else was gonna make it. And really, like the Kennys, the Evans, the Johnnies that made that season so difficult on me, they weren't doing that because there was this like weird love triangle thing going on. None of them, including me, really cared that much about it. Like in the grand scheme of things, we had all kind of moved on. Neither Johanna or I wanted to be together. Kohutta and Kellyanne had moved on. Everyone was relatively healthy. It made for great fodder for a storyline. But by that point in time, why I was enemy number one had nothing to do with all the people. It had to do with I was jacked. I had not lost anything. I was just kind of, I was this big kind of early legendary character that they were all scared of. And they had this group, and that group decided as soon as they found out that I was coming, we got to get rid of him because he'll beat us, he'll steal our show, all this kind of stuff. And so it was really just like my threat level to them was on this, I don't know, it was off the charts. And it was a combination of their fear and insecurity and jealousy of my status in the game that they wanted to take out.
And what's interesting is they put them on your team. Yeah. So I remember I think the first challenge that you guys did, and they were picking who was going to compete in that particular challenge. And you said the most fair thing to do is to draw names out of the hat. And Kenny and Evan were campaigning for like whatever is in the best team interest. So it ended up being a case of they did what they decided. Kenny was like, me, you, and Darrell are going in. That's it. And then you went on the rope and tried to throw the mission as you told them that you would. it didn't end up working out. So did you feel like you had a real chance to win this season knowing that you had that whole group against you?
Not really. I didn't know how bad it was going to be until I got there. And they had already kind of made up their minds. They didn't like that the season was gearing up to just give me all this attention, is what it boiled down to. I showed up late because like the directors knew that I was going to be such a big part of the story that they flew me in separate, which is like unheard of.
Wow.
And that pissed them off more than anything, because it just meant that to them, it was like all special treatment. And also there was this rumor that I was getting paid more than everybody else. And their egos couldn't handle it. And so I show up late, and I just went into this incredibly hostile environment and run by people that were all kind of formally my friends. And I did nothing wrong to them. It's just, when Kenny decided to cross the line with my ex the season prior, they knew they had to kind of pick a side, and they chose to go with the numbers rather than who was right. And I don't blame them for that. They can do whatever they want, but it just stinks that I had this huge group of people that were all coming at me because they would rather be in this group of sheep than stand by the guy that did nothing wrong. And then they spent the next 10 years of their lives trying to paint me as this bad guy to make up for the fact that, it was Kenny that slept with his friend's ex as soon as possible. It was Johnny and Evan that chose to stick by Kenny and not me. Like, I did nothing to them. I show up, and as soon as I get there, I'm just immediately thrown in, which is not good for the team, right? You'd throw Cyrus in if it was good for the team, or you pick a name out of a hat, right? So, you look back at like how these rivalries were created, and I struggled to find anything that I ever did wrong. But the problem is they then get onto the show, and then they all say, oh, Wes is a piece of shit. Wes is a piece of shit. And I give like the best interview where I make one good meaty point, such as like what I just had. But then them five, whoever those are, say Wes is a piece of shit, or Wes is not trustworthy, whatever, with no substantiating example. Like, oh, Wes is a piece of shit because he did this, or Wes is untrustworthy because he did this. They just say the first sentence and then don't explain why. The problem is the casual viewer is hearing 5 lackluster interviews saying that I'm not cool versus my one good, meaty, functional interview. And to them, it's like 5-1. And so it's been, that's the reputation that I've had. And they put that on me because it was like this form of propaganda warfare that they did to me a long time ago. It still to this day, it makes it hard to play the game because of it. But it's also made me so much fucking money and attention and clout that it almost like backfired on them. Like, yeah, I have a harder time winning the challenge, but I make more than the people that win the challenge through all the other stuff because they made me so popular. It was like they pigeonholed me into this niche, and I didn't do it on purpose. I definitely now lean into it. But they made that for me, and it's like it's just funny because everything that they were so afraid of, they created.
It's so interesting when you say that, because I think to myself, that was a season, I guess, when the rivalry started between you and Bananas. And it was not really, it didn't seem to be related to you and him having some kind of personal reason between y'all.
Yeah.
Would you say that's the case?
Yeah, no, it was, that was when it started. Him and I were cool. I'd always been cool. We were kind of still on the appearance circuit. I'd only done one challenge with him, and he was there for such a short period of time. He went home first, but we had a really fun, like 4 or 5 days, however long he was there together. And then he just picked the side, and then ultimately he unnecessarily kind of blindsided Kellyanne to throw her in, if I remember correctly. And that's where I kind of went and kind of attacked him. And that's when all that started.
Okay. So, and it's so interesting that the people that started it were not there anymore. And then it just seemed to continue with you and him, and it carried the franchise for what, more than a decade?
Yeah. Yeah. and that was not manufactured. Like
that's the next thing I was actually going to ask you.
We were actually really mad. I mean, look at, you can't act how mad I was at him in that ruined scene. I was really, really mad at him. And then I also crossed the line. Like I was like dancing on the line of violence. And so you can't do that and expect for him to like me back after I did that. Like, and then you add in the fact that Bananas is actually annoyed. Like, and to this day, like in small doses, he's fine. Like in the same way that like, it's funny to see a clown, but you wouldn't want to live with the clown, right? Like in small doses, you think a clown's fine, and then you walk to the next area of the circus. Well, with Bananas being a full-time clown, I have to live with him all the time. So I'm just constant. And by the way, he was obviously, he's gotten a lot more mature, but he was an immature clown who I actually had a lot of distaste for. And then you can't trust someone like that, and he can't trust me. So his squad's coming at me, my squad's coming at him for so long that there wasn't a need to manufacture it. There was 5 great reasons to go at each other for that amount of time. And again, we didn't look at it like we were carrying the seasons. We didn't look at it like it was the backbone of like so many different seasons. It was just, that was just natural. And that's kind of what made it work. The manufactured stuff, I don't know of a good long-term storyline in the history of the show that's manufactured, because they're with authentic people that are playing a game that they really care about. There's enough good storylines for MTV to choose from those.
It was entertaining for us, but do you think that if you didn't have that particular rivalry, you would have more W's under your belt?
Maybe. I mean, maybe, right? It's less about the rivalry and more about, could I have partnered with some of, if not all of those guys, right? At which point then, so it's not that like they were off the board. Like everyone, not only do I show up with a group that's going against me, but I also show up with a group that's off the board of potential people that I could say, hey, do you want to work together? This is what we could do for each other. They're like not even an option. Now I'm left with, whoever else was left. And their squad was large. But there was this like hidden benefit inside of it, which is that because Bananas and I's rivalry was so known and truthful, everyone felt very safe with both of us, because they knew we weren't coming for them, because Bananas and I were coming for each other. So I could sit down with Bob or John or Dylan or whatever fake name, or man or woman, and explain to them why I wanted to work with them. And it was truthful and believable, because they knew my motive was to go after Bananas, and Bananas could do the same thing. So we had this like kind of scapegoat in each of our stories, each and every season. So it made it easy to kind of be very truthful and just be like, hey, like find the people that want to go against that group and then team up. The problem is the people that were left to choose from tended to suck. It was like me and layups, and I could do my best and get numbers, and I often did, but we couldn't defend ourselves in the dailies and the eliminations, and they would just pick us off.
I like hearing you describe the challenge, because for you, it always sounds more like a chess game.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of moving pieces. They all have different strengths and weaknesses, and but yeah, that's probably the main reason why I continue to play it to this day. It's a beautiful and complicated game.
So I wanted to throw some pictures on here. There was something that they do on ESPN on one of their shows that is like, what were you thinking when? So I found a couple of pictures of some moments of you that I want to put up here and just get your feelings if you remember these times. This is number 1. You remember what this is from?
Yeah, I do. It took me a second, but that was me blindly going into the groupie drawer to figure out what girl we were going to hang out with that night. That was such like that little scene right there paved the way for like Jersey Shore. Like that was
I know. I was thinking that.
The groupie drawer and that type of action, like Nehemiah and I being young and just there to have fun and be like, and even though, you know, however you want to view the groupie drawer today, obviously it's overwhelmingly immature. That is the type of antic, like people still bring up the groupie drawer today in the same way that you still bring up gym tan laundry.
Yes.
And so, you know, that was me blindly. And then Paul Rudd and shoot, I'm forgetting the other guy. They were in this movie together, and they did they did a 30-minute show on MTV to promote the movie, and in it they went through like their favorite scenes from the real world, and this was one, and they remade this scene. And Paul Rudd was like, "Oh, this is how I choose my socks to wear. I go into my drawer and I pick them out like that." Well, Wes was doing that, but for girls, and it was pretty funny.
Even though you're saying that it was really immature, and it was, I remember watching this at 17 or whatever I was, and being like, "This is the coolest thing ever."
Yeah. The thing about it, obviously, incredibly immature. Wouldn't do that to this day. I don't even think this would fly to this day. These were all women that were throwing themselves at us, and I was only 20 years old. So because we're in the bars. So these are 21, 22, 23-year-old women giving us their number because that's how you communicate back in the day. And quite frankly, like we didn't even know what any of these girls looked like because there was hundreds of numbers in the thing. So it was like you're just calling up random people at that point to tell them what bar you're going to that night. And it was also like very much so in good fun. But yeah, a very immature part of my life that a lot of people found funny.
So I'm going to hop into this next picture. Okay, so before you even answer this, I was looking at this moment. CT was, I guess, the most feared person in those houses at all times.
Yeah.
And I've seen him come at other people, and they're just scared of him. They're worried about what he's going to do. I don't know if you have the best poker face I've ever seen, or if you just weren't scared, but I don't know how you had that expression while he was screaming at you.
I mean, I was obviously a little scared. And then like, you know, it was just super irresponsible because there was no other cast members that were essentially up to help. There was also no security back then. So there was probably some lone camera operator and audio guy sitting there watching for hours what was a dangerous.
Was that really all night? Because they showed it like it started at night and went all the way into breakfast.
Yeah, there was like an hour to 3 that were off where we were sleeping, but yeah, and we were up for I don't know, we had been doing that for so long that it was basically like we took a nap and then it started again in the breakfast. But like,
oh my goodness,
you know, like those other guys got what's the word? Like sucker punched. And so at least I knew that at any point in time I could get hit. And so I'm not going to initiate the hit, but at least I know it might be coming. So I'm kind of braced or ready. But also it's like what I'm going to be able to defend myself. No one's going to like murder me or anything. Would I beat CT in a fight? No. But could I defend myself better than the other men that had been sucker punched up to that point? Yeah, 100%. And look how good my abs look. Like all of that is worth it. And ultimately, this scene probably is the main reason why we got paired together on Rivals 2, which adds to, you know, my championships.
I was gonna say though, you were one of the only people I know that actually antagonized him on purpose, at least based on what you said in the confessionals, where you were like, I just want to poke the bear kind of thing to get him angry and take him out of the game that way.
I wasn't trying to get him to hit me. And I might have been antagonizing him a little bit, but there's a healthy line between telling him the truth and antagonizing him. And the truth was antagonizing him, but I wasn't going to back down and lie and just cowardice my way out of the conversation. He was just like, why can't, basically all that started because he was like, let's work together. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. It was the one season because I was paired with Kenny that I actually like stood a shot of being in an alliance that could help me. It's just the problem was Kenny got me sent into half the eliminations that season. But if it wasn't for Kenny's complete and utter lack of athleticism, we would have gone into 0 eliminations. We just kept getting last place because he was so bad at the things. Yeah, that's how that all started.
Okay, that's an interesting answer. So jumping into this next picture here, what do we got? The moment you were talking about, or one of the moments you were talking about, where you were getting into it here with Johnny.
Yeah.
Was this one of the moments you were talking about where you were almost ready to fight him for real?
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't going to punch him, but I was incredibly mad at him. The level of disrespect that he was sending my way was just on another level. He is very bad at that point in his life, and he's getting better, but he's better from the worst is still bad. But he's one of the worst I've ever met at conceding points. So I took a fantastic persuasive writing class in college, and we spent a large part of that kind of time throughout that semester talking about how the best way to persuade a reader or a listener or a watcher or whatever, little did I know I was going to use this class in the challenge, but is to concede points to the other side, because it makes all of your arguments so much more credible, because you're acknowledging this isn't black and white. Like, yes, I'll give you 1 or 2 points, but then the 3 or 4 that I'm making, now you have to believe me more. Well, with Bananas, it's like every single thing that I've ever done is bad or unlucky or whatever. And he doesn't, nowadays he kind of does, but he wouldn't concede nothing. We just smoked his ass in this daily. We got all these balls. I hurdled a man. It was like a great performance that sent us into the finals. And it's kind of like, shut the fuck up and just tip your cap. I won. I'm in the final and you guys are safe. So just chill out. And he just couldn't, he just kept kind of coming at me, and he always just went for the lowest blow that he could find. And there were just all these cheap shots, and it was really annoying. But I also have noticed how I've never actually been violent with anybody ever, all the way back from the very beginning, all the way to now. I'm not that stupid, and I've got a way better control of myself than that. So I was never going to hit him, but that doesn't mean that I didn't want to or visualize it.
The interesting thing is, on your challenge wiki, I think it was your challenge wiki that I saw it on. It was like, one of your characteristics is anger issues, temper tantrums, and throwing things.
Yeah. I mean, I've grown out of that, but I haven't thrown anything really since like the real world. And there are a few times where I would say this could be classified as a temper tantrum. That was more of an angry thing. Yeah, like I lean into the game so much. I give it everything I've got. And so when the game doesn't go my way, I sometimes fall victim to that passion. And, the same thing, I could say the same thing has happened to me in sports. Like, there are still some losses from back when I was a kid that still bother me. There are still some like athletic rivalries that I had from high school that still bother me. And the reason why I was having the top rivalries at the top of my sports at all the time is because that level of passion and competitiveness is an absolute prerequisite of greatness. That's what manifests into some of these like real life kind of distastes for each other. So it's us 3 guys right there on that screen have such an immense amount of passion that passion is translated into mistakes. But that passion also translated into a bunch of wins, and the fans like both mistakes and wins. You can't win without the passion, and you don't really make many mistakes without the passion.
That almost made me want to mention something about this season. Well, I will. These current seasons, we have somebody like Casey from these recent seasons who kind of wins without any of that. So the game seems to have changed in that regard.
Yeah. It would be really easy to bash Casey right now, but I think all of the internet is already doing that, and for just reasons. The fandom's pissed, and I don't blame them. But she is one of the most naturally athletic women that's ever been on the show, and she knows it. And then she's got a very, very innovative approach to the social side of things that you kind of have to tip your cap to. Now, is it boring as hell? Yeah. Oh my God, it's bad, but it's really good. So between those two things, she doesn't have much of an incentive to kind of change it. And then another thing, like, our women are not women. Our women are cast from different pools as the men. Like, her competition is not what my competition is. It's like the women's. It's like, you look around, and I'm not going to name names, but when you look at the guys' side, you're like, oh, professional athlete, ex-Olympian, bodybuilder, runner, triathlete, all this. You look at it like that, and then you look down the women's side, and there's not any of that. And people are like, well, why is Jenny West not there? And it's like, part of me feels like, and I don't know this for a fact, she's been kind of sidelined because she was so much better than all the other women that she would just dominate them. So they have to leave her sidelined. And so that is happening to where it's like, okay, when a real actual like kind of athlete shows up, they end up sidelining them. And I feel like Casey's like on the edge of getting sidelined because she's just an actual athlete competing with fill in the blank women that aren't.
I think the game really benefits. I think she really benefits in the game with her relationships that she has, in terms of being asked back, because it's like she has a relationship with half the house.
Yeah, I don't think that casting cares about that part. If anything, it might be a strike against her, because they don't want to have these big pre-existing alliances. It's just kind of hard to get around that. But yes, again, socially, she's great. And she already had a little bit of a squad, right? Like, to roll into her first challenge and have that Big Brother alliance. And then it's almost like she got to buy into this other alliance when she started dating Nany, because Nany's got this large pre-existing
group. Yes.
And so it's like when two powerful families marry each other.
Yeah.
Or two people, one from each side marries each other, and then all of a sudden both of those families become more. That's almost like what's happened, and it's a Monopoly-esque effect at this point. Because shoot, I feel like I even am in her alliance now because I feel like a sense of like I have to protect her now because of Nany. And so it's weird, but yet has Casey ever one time pulled me aside and tried to help me? No. Or work with me? No. But yet by default, I have to protect her because of Nany. So it's like, yeah, she's in a great spot.
I feel like Casey has an uncanny ability to be around when a lot of these different situations are happening, but nobody really notices she's in the room or what side she's on. Even though she clearly does have a side, it's not in everyone's face like that.
Yeah. Well, we're filming a documentary and making a TV show, and the TV show is more important than the game. Both are important. If she can figure out a way to, and she might be able to do this, but if she can figure out a way to broadcast what her brilliance is just that. If she could broadcast her brilliance just a little bit more, she might become a fan favorite. Now, it is understood and acknowledged that broadcasting your brilliance will make your road in the game harder. But let's say that it makes her road 50% harder. Okay. But she's the likelihood that she's asked back at this point is always on thin ice. And so if she just broadcast herself and made her into this kind of legend of the TV show, she could have a 10-year run on this and win 5 more times, just because even a 50% harder chance times 15 shows adds up to a lot of money. But you know, at this point, the shoe, it's not broke. So there's not really much of a reason to fix it. It's just, we as viewers, and like when I said on our recaps and stuff that you watch, I would love to see, I feel like she's just on the precipice, because she's got that brilliance. I just wish that she let the viewers in on it a little bit more.
Makes a lot of sense.
I was tired. That was a very hard battle. And it took everything out of us. And even though technically we had seen that before, like Anissa went against like Paula for 2 seconds in it, this was really the first true time that pole wrestle was ever like played by 2 legitimate people. And so no one really knew what your body would feel like. We were experiencing that for the first time. And so by the end of it, when it was done, I mean, it's a physical battle. It's a full body physical battle, as one can imagine, but it's a test of forearm strength, forearm muscular endurance, like nothing else. And so that was, you know, and you're sitting there, you know, at that moment, you don't know that it's going to look so good. You don't care about any of the other stuff. You don't know that it's going to be one of those eliminations that's talked about more than anything. You don't know that it's the best elimination of all time. You don't know any of those things as you're sitting there. We're blind to that until it airs, which might be 3 to 6 months later. And then like the cult classicness of that moment, you don't even know that for even years. And so it's just weird to look at like the naivete of both of us sitting there and not knowing that that moment is going to be discussed for the next 20 years. I'm glad I didn't, because that would have been an unnecessary amount of pressure. I already cared a lot about being there, obviously, but man, it was good to get that win, because I get to dine out on that moment for 20 years where it's like, you know, it's aided in the chip on his shoulder for 20 years.
And I met him like earlier this year, and he was still mad about this challenge when I asked him about it.
Yeah. I mean, again, like we talked about earlier, he's a competitive man, and this is brought up a lot. And
you did tell him on the show or you did say that you want to name your future kids, or not name your future kids. You want him to be the godfather of your future kids at that time.
Subsequently, I've taken that back, but yeah, I mean, it's like, if you've ever gotten into like a actual fight with someone that you didn't like, at the end of that fight, sometimes you got it out of you, and you really
shake hands, yeah,
and you're like over it. There's sometimes there's some health associated with having it out with another man. And at that moment, when I made that Godfather comment, it was kind of like that, like, hey, like, because we had no rivalry, not really. I mean, the rivalry really started in my eyes after I found out that he was responsible for starting the steroid rumors. Or at least I should say, he's the one that got caught, whether there was other people that were aiding in that or not, but he's the one that got caught. And I kind of attribute him with being the one that kind of lit the flame there. And so that to me was always my biggest kind of gripe with him. And, you know, when I tell him things like that, he doesn't say, oh no, I didn't tell anyone that. He tries to defend that he thought I was on steroids, which is his way of saying, yeah, I was definitely telling people I thought you were on steroids. And, you know, it was really easy for people to latch on to that, because it's so much easier it's easier to say that guy's on steroids than it is to say, man, that guy just beat me. or that guy's a threat for all these fair reasons. That guy's a threat because he swam his entire life. That guy's a threat because he works his ass off in the weight room. That guy's a threat because he reads and he studies and he's a student of life. It's easier to say he's on steroids, and he started that, and he gave a really good excuse, a fake and defamatory excuse to a bunch of my haters from that point on. And even to this day, like if I post a shirtless photo as an almost 40-year-old man, there will still be people that will say things like, oh, back on the steroids. And it's like, I really do, even though obviously a lot of people, Jordan, Bananas, and all this stuff piled on, Derek was the innovator of that rumor. And it just started very shortly after I beat him here.
I see. So I have one more picture. I believe I have one more picture. This is from the Challenge All Stars 3.
Yeah. So I used him as my phone call that week. Really, it was an extra phone call. I'd already called my wife, and then I pitched an idea to the producers. I was like, "Do you guys think what do you think about me calling Bananas and asking him for advice, like a phone a friend?" And you're not allowed to talk about the game to anybody. And so I was like, listen, this is only going to work if you let me violate the rules. So just let me tell them whatever I want. Let me explain the rules, make him sign an NDA, and make him sign the contract. And he did. He signed the contract, all this stuff. And I did catch some flack on the internet, people being like, oh my God, it's against the rules and all this kind of stuff. But it's like, anyone's allowed to break any rule that you want if there's a mutually agreed upon reason that the producers, like, it's a show before it's anything else. And if anyone thinks that I take his advice in that phone call, like, seriously, and it helps, is lying to themselves. It's a gag. Like, we were being funny. And I don't apologize for being naturally funnier than the radical majority, if not every one of the other cast members, and just chalk it up as another thing that they're jealous about. If there was such thing as comedic steroids, they'd say I'd be injecting myself with that too. But yeah, it was just, it was just funny to get his, I don't know. We're just looking for, they need scenes that paint the story of what's going on. And when I told him what was going on, I had to kind of reflect on what was going on. So the viewer gets like a little mini recap. And then he was in immediate character. Like, he was warned about this idea and he signed the contracts and everything, like, no more than 45 minutes before I called him. And
wow.
So the fact that he answers the phone, already has the thong on, is in characters, wearing his crown, he's ready to go. It just shows, like, he's a 24/7 clown. And again, that's why that phone call is so funny, because in short doses, I'm down to have some clown. But can you imagine living with that?
I cannot imagine living with him. I know you don't have too much time left. I did want to ask you a couple more questions. For sure, I wanted to ask you about this D situation, how difficult that was for you. And also, do you think that MTV made the right choice in terms of cutting her out of the rest of the season scenes for that season?
That was that was a very, very complicated time and a very complicated situation. And to this day, I know that everyone has strong feelings about it. But there's not real, I've heard them all, right? So, and I see it from everyone's side. I see it from her side. I see it from MTV's side. I see it from people that really did not like what she said to people that kind of defend it and say that it wasn't that bad. I see it all, right? But it's so divisive in what MTV did, and it's so divisive in what she said. And so I am like kind of in the middle, sitting here saying, hey, everyone's got to acknowledge there's a bunch of people on all these sides, and I'm just trying to get everyone to move forward. I'm trying to do what's best for the fandom, for the show, for the people that she disrespected, for her. Like, what is the best way that everyone can kind of move forward? Because she was suicidal. And my job at that point in time, when all that was going down, was to prevent her from committing suicide. That was priority number one. And while I'm doing that, I have, people chiming in left and right about about everything. And I'm just sitting there like, I can't go online and say what I just said, because that could kill her.
Right.
And yet by not saying anything along those lines, everyone's going to keep piling on her, which could kill her. So I'm like, I mean, these are the types of things that are going through my head. And that's why when I sent out like a 2 tweets, if I remember correctly, that were very very stern of like, this is like the straw that broke the camel's back. I need to send her out of this place. She needs to go somewhere else. But I try to allude to the things that I just mentioned about her potentially harming herself. And
yes, I remember those tweets.
To try and like thread the line of saying she made mistakes, repercussions are going to happen from these mistakes, but yet at least some temporary empathy needs to be provided while we get everyone just on a little bit more solid ground. And that was my goal, because whether my friendship with her or whatever meant less than her life. And so that was just the priority. It didn't matter what I thought of her at the moment. And then, the other thing that I do sometimes catch some flack from the other side, the people that think I threw her to the wolves too soon, or that I threw her to the wolves at all. But what they don't know is that for weeks and even months at that point in time, she had been in Kansas City doing irresponsible things that could have massive blowback on me professionally. And that had nothing to do with being disrespectful to African Americans. That just had to do with maybe doing drugs in places that she shouldn't, or saying things she shouldn't, or violating COVID protocols. And, I'm a businessman here, and she's a guest of mine. And so there was a lot of things that she had done up to that point in totally unrelated topics, where she had continuously been putting me for weeks in very dangerous professional situations. So when she said what she said on Twitter and Instagram or whatever, that to me, not only was it bad, very, very bad, but it was more than a straw, but it was the straw that broke the camel's back of like, you are now once again making irresponsible choices that are putting me in a dangerous situation. And look at it now. Like, I mean, like there's still so much online about that moment, and it uses my city and some of my business words in it. And so it's like, when people Google us, it's a complicated thing that you have to really be paying attention to, and I could get drugged down. Now, granted, I think I navigated out of that fairly well in the grand scheme of things, but it's because I made some very timely decisions there. Now, on MTV's side, what they did was very aggressive, but it was on the aggressive side of a professional choice, and not necessarily the wrong one. It's very easy to poke holes in what they did, but it would also be really easy to poke holes in them having not done anything. No matter what, based on the time of that situation, no matter what they did, that people were going to be loudly poking holes. So I don't think that what they did was wrong. And me, even though it's easy for me to poke holes in what they did, it was on the aggressive side of a professional choice. And I think that there are damn good arguments to what they did was the right move. But again, arguments for why it wasn't either. I think, like, if I had to say what they probably should have done, would have been one title card to say that they're cutting ties, or even if tweet that says they're cutting ties, but don't touch the rest of the season. But because it really did a hack job on, I mean, they re-edited a 90-minute show to 60 minutes in like a day. So what, like, the fact that they could even make it somewhat not known what they did is impressive for that short amount of time. But it really did dampen the rest of the season. And
it did for me, because as a fan, we're sitting here looking at certain scenes and saying, was this even in here before? Because this looks kind of irrelevant. Yeah. And then we're seeing the back of her head in certain spots. And it was just a little, but I guess I understand based on what you're saying that they were in a tough spot.
Well, she was the main character of the last half of the season because they all bullied her like horribly. So she came out of this incredibly traumatic situation and then basically went into COVID hiding and then all this stuff. And so she felt she was just on edge, on thin ice, mentally, emotionally, all this kind of stuff. And so that's obviously not a defense for what she did because it's indefensible, but it definitely, there's more to it than that was going on with her. And that she was in an incredibly, incredibly stressful and weird period of her life that anyone that hates her needs to acknowledge that, because again, like we talked about earlier, to have your points matter, you have to concede some points. And there's a whole ass story associated with that whole circumstance.
To be honest with you, I listened to a podcast that she just started doing. And at the original time when it happened, I said, all of this was too harsh, maybe, and too fast. But then after listening to the podcast, which was after 2 years to reflect, think about everything, it sounded kind of the same as the original defenses, where it was more, she said the fans baited her into that, and it's the fans' fault, and she was new to Twitter, didn't know that people were against you on Twitter, and they made her do it, and she was mad at the cast. It seemed more about what everything that happened to her, more than like, I was wrong here, and I realized that I shouldn't have put that out, period.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I know that we've reached the time, so I just want to know, do you have time for any more questions?
I've got time for one more.
One more. Okay. So I guess the one question that I'll ask is, do you have plans on coming back to the flagship show? Because a lot of people want to see you back with that cast.
For me, my company is exploding in a good way. And it's becoming incredibly irresponsible for me to go on the show at all, any of them, any incarnation of it. But including and especially the flagship, because it's the longest filming duration. It's not inconceivable for me to go. It just all has to do with scheduling. And the problem is, because they're filming so many shows at all times, they did all the international ones. They did CBS. They did All Stars. They're doing flags. They're doing so much. They're busy. And everyone will jump as soon as they tell them to jump. So there's not a crazy incentive for them to plan the cast months and months and months in advance, because the cast most of them will just go when they're asked. And so guys like me, if I'm given a lot of time, I can actually build these large ass windows in my future where I could get off 3 months if I needed to, but I need like 6 months advance notice. And so it's very challenging, and they don't give anywhere near that. So the trick that I've been trying to do is I try and like way ahead of time, try and get an idea of the dates. And then I make a decision 4 months before I'm even technically asked, and before dates have ever, and then start moving things around under the assumption that I will be asked and that I want to go. And then the asks come, and then the contracts come, and all this kind of stuff. So the answer is, I'm gonna try to do All Stars and what do you call it, flagship, or even CBS. Like, I'll try and do any and all of them, because I know my time is coming to an end. And so therefore I want to do as many of them as I can, but that really means 1, maybe 2 more. And it all has to do with scheduling. And because of that, I can't be picky. I can't say, oh, now I'm going to hold out so I can do All Stars, or I'm going to hold out so I can do flagship. No, I'm going to do whatever they give me that I can actually pull off. And so I don't get to strategically like shoot for the flagship. But it is a possibility.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I hope that we see you soon, whenever that happens to be. I want to thank you once again so much for your time. I know your time was limited today, but it's something, again, like I told John Brennan, something that I can cross off of my bucket list is interviewing my favorite challenger here. So thank you so much, Wes.
Well, thank you. I always get a kick out of talking with you on Patreon. You have a really good, you know, like view on everything. Like maybe I say good because they line up very much with me. You make some do some call outs.
It's because of the way you break things down. You're like, well, this happened, but this might have been this person's thinking, and there might be something behind this. It's not just that you jump on the popular way of thinking and just make people just get angry at everybody.
Yeah, I hate that. Especially in the format that like what we're doing right now and on Patreon. The point is to diagnose, like kind of what we tried to just do with the D situation. The world is not binary. Like not everything is ones or zeros, grays and blacks, whites and blacks. There's shades in all of this. And we need to look at all of the different data points and understand like, I like to weigh all the different sides and look at it from that standpoint. And almost like out of every complicated situation, you can almost make a rubric to decide kind of where you stand on it all. And that's part of the fun of this long form kind of modality that you and I both have here. And that's the point of it.
I'm going to mention that really quick, though, about your Patreon. When I told Wes this before, when I first subscribed to the Patreon, it was just maybe to see a month or two of content because I subscribed to several other challengers for a month or 2 months. But his breakdowns and also the fact that I could reach out and message him and really break down the game almost like a nerd and be like, Wes, these are all my different points about what happened in this episode. And Wes is sitting here answering each one of those points one by one. It's something extra that I get from being subscribed to that channel that I've appreciated during this time.
Well, I appreciate it too, because I like to do that. It's just you can't do that on Instagram or Twitter because then you get all of these people that are there just to be negative or haven't paid attention or they're casuals or whatever. Whereas on Patreon, it's 100% positive people that are paying attention. And so therefore, if someone disagrees with me, I take that very seriously because I know that they're both positive and paying attention. Whereas on Twitter, it's like the point is to be, I don't know. So even though, yes, I do make money off of it, it really is the best place for me to kind of engage with fans because it filters out so much of the nonsense and it just leaves me with an incredibly positive group of people there.
And I hope one of these days, maybe I get that status to get Patreon because I get plenty of those people you're talking about on my YouTube.
Yeah.
Oh, man. But thank you once again, Wes, and we'll talk again soon.
Cool. Appreciate it.
Have a great day. Thanks, everyone, for watching.
Bye.